Hello and welcome to my podcast on the apocalypse. My name is Steve. In my previous podcast, I introduced the book, The Apocalypse Letter by Letter, a literary analysis of the book of Revelation by Stephen Paul. In this podcast, I'm going to reveal more of the author's personality by including his greeting and his way of explaining things. This specific podcast will be very important to unlocking when the author believes the key events fit in the current timeline. Here's his letter of introduction. Dear friends of the Lord, I gave you my word that I would write the last part of the commentary on the apocalypse, and so here it is for you to keep what I have kept, but I cannot give you my word that it is my last word on the little book, for then I should have to keep what I have never kept, my mouth shut. This statement connotes neither a premise to anything nor a promise to anyone, and it can occasion anxiousness only in those who hope that I, sooner rather than later, will either give or keep my last word on any subject, including myself. The fact is that my loquacity partially follows my idiosyncratic mind, which has never been an open and shut case, regardless of what other kind of case people may have opined of me. Yet from this, my oral reputation notwithstanding, one ought not to draw the silly elation that repetition which makes reputation also makes necessity. Moreover, since God has not anointed me to the office of prophet, it cannot be that he expects me to prophesy with authority unto the people, and since everyone else, including myself, cannot seriously expect that he will give me the appointment hereafter, and concomitantly cannot expect I will have the appointment to keep, because it would be silly to expect the unexpected, and since people cannot be necessarily serious regarding disappointment about the appointment or disappointment about no appointment, because neither appointment nor disappointment was ever the point in the first place. Then also in keeping with right reason, am I in giving no anxiousness whatsoever to whatever I will disappoint anyone, or to whether anyone will disappoint me, quod erat demonstratum. Hence I presently advise, as previously, judge for yourselves. This part of the commentary covers the apocalypse from chapter 9, verse 12 to chapter 22, verse 21. Its principal objectives are to explain terms, to clarify the order of events. Here's a rather literal translation of chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. And was given me a reed like a rod, as he said, come and measure the sanctuary of God, and the altar and the ones worshiping in it, and the court, the outside of the sanctuary, cast outside and not it measure. For it was given to the nations, and the city, the holy, they will be trampling months 42. And I will give to the two witnesses of me, and they will be prophesying days 1,260, all clothed of sackcloth. Regarding the above verses, almost every modern edition of the Bible, including the New American Bible, translate the noun naos as temple and the imperative ekbala as omit or exclude. Ever and everywhere it is both prudent and fair not to opine, but rather to seek and find the meaning of any term or expression that the Bible uses. A few references out of many will help clarify the term temple. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. But Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. You are the body of Christ and individually members of it, 1 Corinthians. For we are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and they shall be my people. It opens its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It's from the Apocalypse. Hence the term temple means the church, for the church is the brethren collectively and individually. The speaker, however, commands John to omit or to exclude the court outside the temple and measure it not. The command seems redundant and unnecessary because one does not have to omit or exclude what is already outside. The term ekbale is the imperative singular of ekbalein, which is composed of the prefix ek, equals out, and the verb balein, to throw, cast, or hurl. Moreover, the adverb exothen, which means outside or on the outside, emphasizes whither the court is to be cast. Note that the same word is used in apposition with the term court. It It is thereby intimated that the court outside is in some sense already outside. Thus, the command is, and the court, the one outside the temple, cast outside and measure it not. The command still seems not to make any sense, but remember the beginning of chapter 4, John was suddenly in the Spirit, and he looked through a door that stood open in heaven and saw one seated on the throne and the 24 elders, etc. This means John perceived in a spiritual manner the inside court of heaven, or the church. The physical or visible is symbolic of the spiritual or invisible. The description is graphic so that the human imagination has something to grasp more easily. Now, verse 2 begins to make sense, except for the translation temple. The New Testament writers consistently use the noun naos instead of I-E-R-O-N, iron, temple, to denote the church. In Acts 17:24, Paul tells the members of the Areopagus that God does not live in handmade shrines. In Luke 11:51, Christ mentioned Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the house. But in Matthew, he said, in between the sanctuary and the altar. The term house is often translated as sanctuary regarding the Temple of Solomon. A perusal of the New Testament finds that the temple had a forecourt, then further inward, a court where the beasts were kept overnight, and furthest in the inner court. Finally, Christ's command in Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 22 sheds light on the matter. So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it, and whoever swears by the sanctuary swears by it and by the one who dwells in it, and whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and the one who is seated upon it. The description John gave in chapter 4 limits the church to an inside court, the one in the middle, and an outside court, the door, implies that there is a wall separating the two courts. If this is compared to a church, the altar and tabernacle, God's throne, are located in the sanctuary. Therefore, the term naos should be translated as sanctuary. The masulis, the one in the middle or the midst of the church. This concept is very important. Remember it. Also, the sanctuary in the Temple of Solomon was sometimes called the holy place or simply the place. But in a Roman Catholic church, the sanctuary would be a holy place because God is present in each tabernacle. Thus, the speaker's command now makes a little more sense. John is to measure the church's inside court, but its outside court he is to cast outside the church. Not yet, not quite yet is reason fully satisfied, because this text still implies that the outside court, in some sense, is already outside. The measuring instrument given to John is a kalamos, a kind of reed that grows as high as 20 feet along the Jordan River. And when the messengers of John were departed, he began to speak to the multitudes concerning John. What went ye out into the desert to see? A reed shaken in the wind? That's from Luke chapter 7, verse 24. But ominous is the phrase added to it, like a rod. The rod is a prophetic term that symbolizes authority of divine origin. It signals the terrible severity with which God will separate the good from the bad, the faithful from the unfaithful. Woe to the Assyrian, he is the rod and staff of my anger. My indignation is in their hands, from Isaiah 10, chapter 5, verse 5. Since the speaker commands John to measure only the sanctuary and cast the rest outside, the measuring connotes that those in the sanctuary have a towel on their foreheads and are sealed, and that they will cooperate with God's grace to preserve to the end of the judgment about to begin, whereas the rest in the outside court will be cast outside into the spiritual darkness about to flood the whole world, where in the end there will be, as Christ warned, weeping and the gnashing of teeth, from Matthew chapter 8, verse 12. So had John been given a measuring line, an increase in the size of the church would have been indicated, but the rod portends the contrary. And I lifted up my eyes and saw and behold a man with a measuring line in his hand. And I said, whither goest thou? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see how great is the breadth thereof, and how great the length thereof. And behold, the angel that spoke in me went forth, and another angel went out to meet him, And he said to him, Run, speak to this young man, saying, Jerusalem shall be inhabited without walls, by reason of the multitude of men and of the beasts in the midst thereof. From Zechariah chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. As a parting comment here, I point out that a reed is not as hard and solid as a rod, for it is tacit that the term rod signifies an iron rod. The reed is not for shattering pottery. Thou shalt rule them with a rod of iron and shalt break them in pieces like a potter's vessel. It's from Psalms 2, chapter 2, verse 9. The iron rod can shatter it easily and totally. For the voice of the Lord, the Assyrian shall fear being struck with a rod, and the passage of the rod shall be strongly grounded, which the Lord shall make to rest upon him with timbrels and harps, and in great battles he shall overthrow them. From Isaiah chapter 30, verses 31 and 32. This means that the most severe part of the judgment will not come during the time of measuring the sanctuary, but after it. God will give to the nations as secondary agents the task of inflicting judgment upon those cast outside the church. This is only fitting and proper, but reason still stands. The text emphasizes the idea that the court is already in some sense outside. The Greek aorist form of a verb are used, the forms of a verb are used to convey the idea that an action or act is single or simple rather than repeated or prolonged. For example, a present infinitive often indicates a continuous or progressive action or state, while an aorist infinitive indicates a single act. Here's an example. The verb measure in verse 1 is a direct positive command in the aorist active voice, second person singular. The direct negative command not measure in verse 2 is the aorist active voice, second person singular subjunctive mood. Each verb conveys the idea that the command is to be carried out only once. The present participle worshiping near the end of verse 1, though, used as a plural noun nonetheless, conveys the idea of continuous or repeated action. This means that the worshipers at the altar are those who daily keep the commandments of Jesus and often partake of the Eucharist. The future participle will be trampling, and verse 2 modifies the noun nations. The future participle will be prophesying, and verse 3 modifies the noun witnesses. Each participle connotes the idea of continuous or repeated action. Finally, note the verb was given at the beginning of verse 1 and also at the start of the dependent clause in verse 2. Both are in the aorist passive voice, third person singular, and each indicates a single act or action, which agrees with the aorist sense of the direct commands. All versions known to me translate the former as was given, but the latter as is given or has been given. The obvious fact is that the same verb in the same form is used in both places and therefore should be translated the same way, was given. Since the future participle will be trampling modifies nations, the outside court, by being given to the nations, is also given to the same tract of time, namely the 42 months during which the nations will be trampling the holy city. In other words, the aorist was given to the nations can be understood as will be being given to the nations. The connective kappa alpha iota, chi, equals and, after the noun nations indicates the synchronism of both was given and will be trampling. Here, reason again confronts the question of how the court can be outside before it is outside. The answer to the court question comes in verse 3 when the speaker says, "And I will give to the two witnesses of from me," genitive or possession origin, "and they will be prophesying." Obviously, the speaker is God himself, for only God can give the office of prophet. Since God is infinite, he is omniscient, therefore knowing all of the finite creation. He alone can see the future of the present, that the court not yet formally outside the church is in spirit already outside. Those in the outside court shall not stand before the throne, but apostatize. The text is signaling the reader regarding Christ's letter to the church at Laodicea, the seventh letter in chapter 3, verse 16. The outer court represents those whom Christ will vomit out of his mouth. They are the tepid brethren, the half-hearted, who do the minimum at most to stay within the church. The timid souls who keep to the shadows will not come full into the light. Spiritually weak, they shall not be able to withstand the storm of evil about to burst over the whole earth. The words of 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17 apply. The time has come for judgment to begin with the house of God. As evil grows toward the extreme of evil, so must the good grow toward the extreme of good, just to remain good. The identity of the speaker can logically be deduced. It helps one's reasoning that the phrase Apocalypsis Isu Christou, the revelation of from Jesus Christ, dominates the whole prophecy. I will explain more about Greek verbs later, lest your digestion contest its own process. Old and New Testaments make it perfectly clear that the holy city in verse 2 is Jerusalem. Arise, arise, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on the garments of thy glory, O Jerusalem, the city of the Holy One. The Lord, against all thy justice, let thy wrath and thy indignation be turned away. I beseech thee from thy city, Jerusalem, and from thy holy mountain. From Daniel. 70 weeks are shortened upon the people and upon thy holy city, that transgression may be finished, and sin may have an end, and iniquity may be abolished, and everlasting justice may be brought, and vision and prophecy may be fulfilled, and the saint of saints may be anointed. Also from Daniel. Then the devil took him up to the holy city and set him upon the pinnacle of the temple, from Matthew chapter 4, verse 5. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, came into the holy city and appeared to many. Matthew chapter 27, verse 53. Verse 2 states, for it, the court outside was given to the nations, and they will be trampling the holy city for 42 months. Then verse 3 states, and I will give to the 2 witnesses from me, and they will be prophesying for 1260 days. These statements together constitute a literary device called a parallelism. Parallelism is employed to show or to emphasize sameness or difference. Here, the parallel construction strongly suggests that the period of 42 months and that of 60 days will be one and the same period, but does not prove it will be so. To get the proof, this parallelism must be cross-referred with verses 8 through 14. The city where the 2 witnesses will be killed by the beast is also the city where their Lord was crucified, i.e. Jerusalem, spiritually called Sodom because of sins of the flesh, and Egypt because of sins of the spirit, most especially idolatry and persecution against God's dwelling. This will fulfill Christ's words. It is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside Jerusalem, from Luke chapter 13, verse 33. The 2 witnesses' tract of 1260 days ends when the beast kills them. The tract of 42 months of the nations trampling the holy city ends when the survivors of the earthquake there give glory to God. This event comes 3.5 days after the beast has killed the 2 prophets, a difference of 0.277% between the end of one and the end of the other. Hence, for the most part, the 1260 days and the 42 months are the same tract of time. Nota bene, the conversion of the survivors marks the end of the second woe, chapter 11, verse 14. That is to say, it marks the beginning of the conversion of the Jews and the beginning of the end for the beast and his empire. In verse 7, John mentions the beast for the first time in the Apocalypse. It is the beast ascending from the abyss, the same abyss that the fallen star opened up at the beginning of chapter 9, and the same abyss into which the demons, Legion, begged Jesus not to send them back in Luke chapter 8, verse 31. John used the term abyss to denote the spiritual origin of the beast, but he also used it to note the beast's worldly origin mentioned at the beginning of chapter 13, the sea. The sea in the Old Testament was used to symbolize peoples or nations wicked for their paganism and for their hostility toward God and his people. In Isaiah chapter 17, verse 12 wrote, "Ah, the roaring of many peoples that roar like the roar of the seas, the surging of nations that surge like the surging of mighty waves." And in chapter 57, verses 20 and 21, he wrote, "But the wicked are like the tossing sea, which cannot be calmed, and its waters cast up mud and filth. There is no rest for the wicked, says my God." Therefore, the noun abyssos should not be translated as the bottomless pit, but as the abyss, especially to retain the connotations. With the term abyss, John conspicuously alludes to the nations, but it must be borne in the brain at all times that a term must be interpreted strictly with regard to context. As the commentary proceeds, this rule will become colossally obvious. In the next podcast, we'll dive into the two witnesses, their identity and purpose. The book is found at theapocalypseletterbyletter.com, and a discount code is provided at the top of the page. Till next time, may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you and keep you.